Iulia Ryan. Iulia Ryan, a 47-year-old mother of 3, was excited to celebrate the approaching holiday season with her kids on December 1, 2014. She never got to spend her favorite time of year with her loved ones because, regrettably, someone ruined her plans. 3 days later, on December 4, 2014, the Abu Dhabi Police Department made an arrest in the city, ending their ceaseless investigation into the savage murder. When an unexpected motivation was discovered, and it became increasingly clear that this case wasn't as straightforward as it appeared, the events that followed the arrest caused the authorities to be on high alert once more. Who was this woman that the Abu Dhabi police were holding? And what could she have done that put the investigators in a race against time? The woman who was arrested was 38-year-old Al-Badr Abdullah al-Hashami. She was a Yemeni-born woman living in the United Arab Emirates with her husband, Mohammed al-Habashi al-Hashemi, and their 6 children. Al's eldest child was 10 years old, while her youngest was merely 10 months old when she decided to commit an awful deed. All her kids, young and innocent, were unaware of the wicked schemes that went on inside their mother's head. On Monday, December 1, 2014, Ella set out to bring her plans into action. She put her black gloves on and covered her face with a veiled niqab, a usually black garment worn by Muslim women to cover their face as part of an interpretation of hijab. Leaving her house just a little before 1 p.m. that same day, Ala headed to the famous boutique mall, which was located on Al Reem Island in Abu Dhabi. Despite knowing that the mall was equipped with fully functioning CCTV cameras and that she was being watched by the security, Ala was completely unbothered. She wouldn't turn back or leave the mall without doing what she had to do. Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Ala entered the mall around 1 to 13 p.m. and took the elevator. Upon exiting the elevator, Ala spoke briefly to a security guard and then headed towards the mall's washroom where she encountered a 47-year-old woman named Iulia Ryan. Ala waited for a while, and when Iulia was alone, Ala struck with full force and stabbed her to death. Moments later, after exiting the washroom, Ala rushed to the lobby once again and hurriedly got into the elevator. It didn't take long for the crowd in the mall to notice what had happened inside the washroom. And as they emerged in the lobby in a state of panic, still processing the gruesome murder that had just taken place, Ayla escaped the building. And even though the security at Boutique Mall was usually tight, Ala managed to slip through the hands of the guards. Luckily, all her movements had been captured by the security footage. The mall security informed the Abu Dhabi Police Department of the tragic incident, and as the detectives arrived at the scene, an investigation was launched into the murder. Iulia Ryan was a Hungarian-American kindergarten teacher who was originally born and brought up in Romania. In 2006, she and her husband Paul Ryan relocated to Sopron, Hungary, along with their daughter Tamaya and twin sons, Adam and Aiden, before subsequently undergoing a divorce. After she had separated from her husband, Iulia went wherever her work took her. Over the course of the next few years, Iulia had a diverse teaching career which spanned 4 countries, including the United States, and with Abu Dhabi being her last stop. She had been residing in Abu Dhabi for almost a year, and apart from being a teacher there, she also fulfilled the duties of being a devoted mother to her 11-year-old twin sons who lived with her in their Abu Dhabi home. At the time, Iulia's 13-year-old daughter, Tamaya, was living with her father, Paul, Iulia's ex-husband, in Vienna, Austria. Iulia had devoted herself to the realm of education in the United Arab Emirates, and even though she was in a strange land away from home, she settled in quite well. Beyond the conventional scope of her teaching responsibilities, she also undertook the role of mentoring fellow teachers, contributing significantly to the professional growth of her peers. It was also evident through her actions that her main focus was to lead her students toward a better future, and she was widely recognized for her resolute dedication to her profession. Iulia embodied a sense of purity in this world, serving as a beacon of kindness and compassion. She lived with a profound sense of purpose, consistently striving to create a positive impact and contribute to the betterment of the lives she touched. On December 1st, 2014, as the holiday season was approaching, Iulia had planned to go shopping at the boutique mall and then head home to her twins. But little did she know that fate had different plans for her. During the initial stages of the investigation, authorities faced considerable difficulty in ascertaining the identity of the suspect, who remained completely concealed from head to toe. This also led them to consider the possibility that the perpetrator might be a male masquerading in disguise. A couple of days after the tragic murder of Iulia, specifically on December 3, 2014, Abu Dhabi police issued a public statement indicating that efforts were still underway to determine the identity and gender of the suspect. And although there were many people who saw the killer, none of them could provide any distinctive details such as facial features or build about the suspect, because of the fully enveloping attire consisting with a bi'iyah, black gloves, and a face cover. The Abu Dhabi Security Media Department further shared more information by uploading a video on its official YouTube channel. This footage, featuring CCTV recordings, portrayed the killer labeled as the Reem Island Ghost. The video showcased the reactions of the people present at the scene during the heinous act. Notably, a mother accompanied by a young child was observed hastily ushering the child away, while security personnel approached the corridor in response to the unfolding events. The footage showed heightened awareness around onlookers, with particular attention drawn to activities in the restroom area. The surveillance footage, serving as a critical piece of evidence, also captured the cloaked suspect subsequently picking up a newspaper, probably to conceal the weapon, and then proceeding in the direction of the restroom. Approximately 90 minutes later, the individual suspected of the assault hastily re-emerged into the lobby, prompting disarray among shoppers who swiftly dispersed. In the midst of the chaotic scene, the alleged attacker dismissed the efforts of a woman attempting to interfere with her. As a security guard made his way towards the restrooms, the suspect rushed into the elevator and ultimately fled the scene after the crime occurred. The tape concluded by revealing a distressing visual. A trail of bloody footprints originating from one of the restroom stalls gave a glimpse of the violent and gruesome nature of the crime. Law enforcement officials reported that the unfortunate victim, Iulia, met a tragic end through fatal stabbing. Detectives also discovered a kitchen knife at the crime scene and confirmed that it was the murder weapon. Questioning the witnesses, the detectives learned that prior to the murder, the two women had also gotten into a heated argument. But it wasn't clear to any of the detectives whether the attack on Iulia was planned, or was it just the result of an overly heated argument. The surveillance footage, as well as the official police reports, provided a detailed account of the suspect. Following the commission of the initial crime, the niqabi suspect was seen returning to her vehicle and eventually exiting the scene. Shockingly, detectives learned that the suspect had then proceeded to a residential building situated in the Abu Dhabi Corniche, where once again, an unsettling sequence of events unfolded. The security cameras at this location captured the suspect's movement and showed her walking into the building holding a small black suitcase. She proceeded toward the apartment of a 46-year-old Egyptian-American doctor who was only identified as MH. The doctor lived there with his wife and 3 kids. She left the suitcase near their residence and exited the building. Compellingly, the police video revealed more details about the suspect. In the video, detectives were able to see the presence of blood on the suspect's steering wheel and the black suitcase, identical to the one she allegedly carried to the doctor's apartment. This chilling visual evidence added another layer of complexity to the unfolding narrative, highlighting the gravity of the suspect's actions as she went from one crime scene to the next. Fortunately, the doctor's son spotted the suitcase in the evening while going to the mosque to pray. He saw something strange in front of the house and told his family. They called a security guard for help and he contacted the police. The police were able to confirm that it was a bomb and defuse it just in time before it could explode. The security guard mentioned that a woman with gloves had come to the house just minutes before the incident. She was dragging a black suitcase. He added that she went to the floor where the doctor's family lived and a few minutes later quickly left the building. According to detectives, the homemade bomb was made using basic materials which were easily available in the market. The bomb was made up of a small gas cylinder, a lighter, glue, and nails meant to cause severe injuries when the bomb went off. While the detectives kept the investigation going to identify the killer, they kept their progress and measures under wraps, not sharing many details about the case. On the morning of Thursday, December 4, 2014, Abu Dhabi police caught the person responsible for the crime. The killer was identified as 38-year-old Ala Badir Abdullah al-Hashami. General Sheikh Saif bin Zayed Al Nahyan, who is Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Interior in the UAE, shared that the security and police forces had arrested the suspected woman known as Nikki B for brutally killing the American teacher Iulia Ryan. He highlighted that they identified the suspect in less than 24 hours and arrested her in less than 48 hours. However, the detectives refused to disclose how they successfully identified Ala. Going through Ala's internet search history, it was evident that Ala had become extreme in her beliefs because of the things she saw on the internet and the people she followed. She didn't have a specific plan to hurt a particular American person, but she wanted to hurt someone from another country at random. Ala was quite blunt when she stated the reason behind the attacks and didn't try to hide any details. Ala admitted that she chose Iulia and the doctor simply because they were American. Furthermore, Ala told the detectives in charge of the case that she committed those horrible acts because her husband, Mohammed al-Habashi al-Hashemi, was taken by the police for questioning on the suspicion that he might be connected to terrorist groups. She wanted to get back at the police force for taking her husband and make foreigners, especially Americans, British, and French people living in the country, scared for their safety. These terrible incidents happened after there were other attacks on people from Western countries in Saudi Arabia. Many people around the world heard about these attacks, and it made the international security and business communities worried. Additionally, just a few weeks from Iulia's stabbing, there had been warnings from U.S. embassies in the area because some websites were encouraging attacks specifically on American teachers. Abu Dhabi was mostly considered a safe place for people from other countries to work, and the security there was very strict when it came to work, and the security there was very strict when it came to terrorism. However, in light of these events, people from other countries living in Abu Dhabi began to grow fearful regarding the increasing crime rate against international citizens. The government in the Emirates said that Iulia's killing was a terrorist attack done by one person who had been influenced by online terrorist beliefs. The police clarified that Ala didn't know either of her victims. She carried out those attacks only because of the nationality of the victims and not because of any personal problems. This made the people who live in Abu Dhabi, both citizens and those from other countries, feel uneasy because terrorist attacks almost never happen in the United Arab Emirates. Detectives uncovered another threatening detail about Iulia's murder when they came across a statement made in September 2014 by Abu Muhammad al-Adani, who spoke for the group calling itself the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. In the statement, Abu Muhammad al-Adani urged the Muslim community to harm Westerners and people from any other country involved in the attacks on their group. His exact words were, "Hurt them in any way you can." The attacks that followed this threatening statement were seen as part of a pattern of violent acts inspired by ideas instead of a direct order from militant groups. Other examples included the 2014 ramming attack in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, the beheading of a French tourist named Hervé Gourdel in Algeria, and other attacks on people from Denmark and the United States in Saudi Arabia. Events of terrorism were not taken lightly by the officials in Abu Dhabi. A good chunk of the city's functioning relied on the work of many people from other countries and on tourism to keep its economy going. To make sure that the violence remained isolated, Security authorities sent out a strong message to any other potential terrorists in the UAE, warning them of the dangerous outcomes of any attacks they might be planning. A security official in the UAE, who wasn't named, shared with an Emirates news agency called WAM that just before the attack, Allah had been surfing through terrorist websites on the internet. And it was through these websites that she learned how to make explosives and carry out a murder. The detectives were also keen on exploring the possibility that Allah was not working alone. The police talked to ABC News and said they arrested some other people at Allah's house, but they weren't certain whether these people were involved in the attack or not. Allah told the investigators that her husband, Mohammed al-Habashi al-Hashemi, used to support militant groups. He made her watch and listen to recordings of leaders from groups like Osama bin Laden. Her house was said to be like a base of operations, but it wasn't clear if she was part of any groups. Upon further investigation, it was discovered that Allah was also found guilty of using an online account to share information that mocked and harmed the country. As the news channels covered the report of Allah's arrest, it was revealed that she was also convicted of sending money to Al-Qaeda, a terrorist organization in Yemen, knowing that it would be used to support terrorist activities. On June 29, 2015, before announcing the verdict, Judge Falah al-Hajari said that the UAE, with Allah's blessings, had been and always will continue to be a safe and stable place. It's an example of people living together in peace and harmony. He mentioned that in recent years, some new criminal methods not seen before in the UAE have been used to scare and hurt people. The goal was to disrupt the country's system and put society in danger by doing harmful things. When there was a threat to the overall stability of the nation, it was important to review and deal with these actions in the strictest way possible. That's why the new anti-terror law was achieved to fight against terrorism and get rid of it. The judge ordered the law enforcement to confiscate all the evidence in Allah's case and to shut down the online account Allah had been using to communicate with terrorist organizations. Later, on June 29, 2015, the Federal Supreme Court in Abu Dhabi sentenced 38-year-old Emirati woman, Ala Badir al-Hashimi, to death for committing the murder of 47-year-old Iulia Ryan. Since the ruling was made by the Supreme Court, it could not be appealed. Hence, Allah's fate had been decided. During her trial, Allah requested the court to provide her with psychological help. She said that she had been having strange visions and saw ghost-like people. The court took this into consideration and called for psychiatric tests to be done on Allah. However, the results showed that Allah was well aware of what she did, and her mental state didn't seem to affect her actions when she carried them out. When the court declared the verdict and sentence, Allah, surrounded by 4 police officers, didn't show any emotion. After leaving the court, she smiled and waved at her father and brother. On July 13, 2015, a Monday morning, Ahmed Al-Dhani, Attorney General for the State Security Prosecution, announced that the ruling of the State Security Circuit of the Federal Supreme Court No. 73 of 2015 on the execution of Ala Badr Abdullah had been carried out following the approval of President Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan. However, the officials didn't disclose how Ala was executed. Members of the expatriate community in Dubai held a candlelight vigil in memory of Iulia Ryan and shared how her tragic death had impacted them. The process of closure for Iulia's family, friends, and the teaching community was difficult. Paul Ryan, Iulia's former husband with whom she had 3 children, shared his views on the verdict as well. The recruitment firm that helped bring Paul Ryan to Abu Dhabi started a fundraising campaign so he could take her body back home and support their children's education. After a few weeks, the Ryan family took over the fund and utilized it to help Ryan's family in Romania. General Sheikh Saif talked about Iulia's murder as something that went against the important values the UAE believed in. These values came from the teachings of Islam and the true Arab heritage. He mentioned that the UAE strongly supported these good values, whether it was within the country or in other places. He also shared how sad he felt to see such crimes happening in a country known for its safety and security. Later in 2015, Allah's husband, Mohammed al-Habashi al-Hashemi, faced serious charges for supposedly planning to bomb tourist places and harm a local leader in December of that same year. The name of the leader Mohammed had planned to assassinate wasn't revealed. During a court hearing at the federal Supreme Court, Mohammed persisted that he was innocent and said he didn't do any of the things he was accused of. Mohammed was being represented by two lawyers. One was chosen by the government, and the other was chosen by his family. Both lawyers dodged reporters when asked to make a comment on Mohammed's situation. Mohammed was accused of 7 things, including planning to bomb the Yas Marina Formula One racetrack and a nearby IKEA in the capital. It is also reported that he intended to target a U.S. military installation and tourists. Additionally, Mohammed's connection to the terrorist groups Al-Qaeda and ISIS was established by the police. The court postponed his case until January 18, 2016. However, because there was insufficient media coverage, the public was unaware of the details of the court processes and the outcome. Do you believe Allah would have carried out even more terrorist attacks if the detective hadn't acted quickly enough to result in Allah's prompt arrest? Allah showed no signs of regret or guilt for her acts during her trial. Do you believe that this was the result of terrorist organizations brainwashing her? Moving on to the next case. Jim Sullivan. Jim Sullivan, referred to as Sully by his loved ones, was a talented, innovative, and highly motivated rock and roll performer. His eerie, introspective lyrics and underlying devotion to the core of American folk music were abruptly ended in March 1975 by an inexplicable, untraceable disappearance, leaving those who knew him and upcoming listeners of his music in search of explanations. This investigation of Jim Sullivan's disappearance and the mystery surrounding the La Mesa Motel in the New Mexico deserts is done in the hopes of offering more substantive reasoning based on visible evidence and situational analysis. On August 13, 1940, Jim Sullivan was born in the Linda Vista neighborhood of San Diego, California. His parents, two Irish-American farmers, relocated to Southern California in search of work in the defense sector after leaving Nebraska at the Dust Bowl's peak in the late 19th century. Jim once wrote about his youth in linear notes on his first LP, saying he grew up in a government housing project with a bunch of other Okies and Arches. These experiences helped inspire his fascination with American folk culture, and after frequently listening to local blues groups in the area, Jim decided to dip his toes into the music scene as well. As he entered his teenage years, Jim became quite the athlete, standing at about 6'3" in high school. Whilst playing quarterback for his high school football team, he never missed a chance to rock out on his Sears Silvertone guitar and amplifier, the perfect combo for an upcoming 16-year-old rock and roller. Jim, favoring the nickname Sully amongst his friends, never failed to spark a connection within social circles and met his future wife Barbara in junior high. After finishing school together, Barbara and Jim married. Not long before, Jim joined a classic rock band called The Survivors, a staple in the San Diego music scene fronted by Jim's sister-in-law, Kathy Doran. Jim and Barbara had their first son together, Chris, and when he was 7 years old, the flourishing family moved out to Los Angeles to continue pursuing music and expand their promising horizon. Soon after, Baba received a job at Capitol Records in Hollywood, while Jim dedicated his free time to fine-tuning his guitar skills and making connections within the entertainment industry. He began playing at bigger establishments around the area, such as the Lighthouse and Lindy Opera House. Jim's true hotspot was in Malibu, however, as a celebrity-filled pub called The Raft, where he forged relationships with fellow artists like Farrah Fawcett, Lee Marvin, and Harry Dean Stanton. By 1969, Jim's friends convinced him to record an album and helped him raise the appropriate funding to produce such a project. This first album turned out to be his recording debut, a folk rock endeavor titled UFO. The lyrics originated from spiritual and mystical ideas believed in by Jim, and the recording process included 20 other musicians who contributed a truly ethereal sound, in addition to its country music roots. Not being much of a promoter himself, Jim let his indie record label, Monty Records, advertise UFO. The word circulated through a few unknown music circles and was rumored to be a topic out in Nashville, where Johnny Cash's manager was thought to be an interested party. Even Jim's wife, Barbara, attempted to use her connections at Capitol Records to secure a big name like Beach Boys producer, Nick Venet, to pick up Jim as an artist, but no one took the bait. Unfortunately, the album never caught fire despite Jim and his friends' enthusiasm, and UFO was left for a small reissue at the Century City label. 2 years later, Jim threw together additional resources to release a second album, this time a self-titled project called Jim Sullivan through Playboy Records, completely unrelated to the Playboy brand. Again, the album gained little traction, theorized to be the result of heavy production values that covered up the clever lyrics written by Jim. In the end, after the two projects were a relative failure, Jim and his wife Barbara struggled to get back on their feet at full force and turned to alcohol, where their marriage began to crumble as their careers dwindled into darkness. Years passed before Jim decided that his time in Los Angeles was nearing a stalemate and decided to relocate his musical endeavors to Nashville, Tennessee, where his former bandmate and sister, Kathy Doran, resided. Jim packed up his belongings in his old Volkswagen Bug and told his family to wait and see if he made it big before coming with him. He didn't hesitate and drove out east, making it as far as Santa Rosa, New Mexico before getting pulled over by State Highway Patrol for swerving on the road due to fatigue. To rest for the upcoming journey, Jim headed into town and checked into La Mesa Motel, called his wife from a nearby payphone, and brought a handle of liquor at a local store. What proceeded is unknown, because later that night, Jim Sullivan was last seen walking into the New Mexico desert away from civilization, into the dusty abyss only to vanish and never be heard from again. Jim Sullivan's journey truly began in 1968 when he uprooted his family from the perfectly weathered San Diego, California, to the heart of the entertainment industry's playground, Los Angeles. He, Barbara, and Chris left to engage with the world of rock and roll and dedicated his life to his craft, a true love with music and mysticism. From 1968 to the early parts of 1970, the Sullivan family makes a name for themselves. Barbara secures employment at the legendary Capitol Records in Hollywood, while Jim shares his talents with the rest of Southern California. Jim links up with movie stars and fellow musicians, combining a natural gravitas with pure artistic skills. He makes many friends and frequently plays at packed houses at the Raft Pub near Malibu. In 1969, Jim's album titled UFO was released to a bit of critical acclaim, and all signs point to stardom for the folk musician and his family. However, as the dog days of 1970 came and went, Jim's lyrical prowess loses its luster with LA heavyweights, and he turns to smaller record labels to produce another album. Sadly, the borderline experimental soundtrack never takes off like he hoped, and Jim is left to return to play in the dimly lit clubs he once gained his footing in. Following the track marks of failure and losing the glimmer of success that Hollywood once brought upon the Sullivan family, both Jim and Barbara turned to alcohol, and between 1972 and 1974, they see their once sturdy marriage begin to crumble. In the late winter months of 1975, Jim decides to go against the grain and move out east to Nashville, Tennessee, in hopes to restart his career as a musician in a prominent folk and country music hotspot. Jim and Barbara discuss the family aspect of the proposed transition, and they agree that she and their son, Chris, will wait to see if Jim captures success before joining him on the cross-country relocation. So, on the morning of March 4, 1975, Jim packs personal belongings into his old Volkswagen Bug and says goodbye to the town he once dreamed of sparking stardom in. Between noon and 1 p.m. later that day, Jim physically departs from his family in Los Angeles, hops on the National Highway, and heads east on Route 66. 15 long and lonely hours of driving pass by before Jim is pulled over by police for unintentionally swerving around the roads outside of Santa Rosa, New Mexico, in the wee hours of March 5th, sometime around 3 or 4 a.m. After the traffic stop, Jim is taken into the Santa Rosa police station to take a sobriety test. He proves he has no alcohol or illicit substances in his system and passes the exam. The officers determine Jim is suffering from fatigue after a taxing drive across 900 miles and 3 state lines, and recommend he finds lodging to rest. Later that morning, Jim checks into La Mesa Motel right off of Route 66 in Santa Rosa. However, he doesn't unload any of his belongings, and at some point during the day, he leaves the room key locked inside of the room. An undetermined amount of time passes, and Jim walks to the nearest liquor store and buys a handle of vodka. It's unknown if he immediately consumes the alcohol, but he's then soon witnessed getting back into his Volkswagen and driving around the Santa Rosa area. In the afternoon of March 5th, Jim drives out to a ranch about 26 miles southeast of Santa Rosa, a piece of land reportedly owned and lived on by the Giannetti family. It's unclear what exactly happened at the Giannetti ranch out in the middle of nowhere. However, it's been reported that Jim drove up to the nearby road where an older Italian woman who spoke little English met him with some ranch hands. When she asked him if he had a problem, Jim replied, "No to you." Other reports mentioned Jim driving all the way up to the ranch house and knocking on the door, much to the confusion of Mrs. Giannetti. Regardless of what exactly conspired, Jim leaves his vehicle behind on the ranch that evening of March 5, 1975, and walks off the property towards the endless desert. This is the last confirmed sighting of Jim Sullivan. In the next couple of days following March 5th, after Jim's communication ceases, his disappearance is investigated by Santa Rosa authorities. They trace his final steps around town, ending at the Giannetti family ranch. They find his Volkswagen Bug off on the side with the doors locked and the engine completely dead. Inside are Jim's personal artifacts, including his wallet, his guitar, and a bunch of old musical gear and personal audio tapes. Nobody on the property knew where Jim wandered off to, only that he was seen walking away from the vehicle. A road worker who had been laboring near the vanishing site that day, a man named Sammy Chavez, later recalls seeing the Volkswagen sitting in the middle of a dirt road. He says it was quite a strange sight, and when he headed back the other way after his shift, all of the doors on the Bug had been opened where police were searching. On March 8th, the Volkswagen is towed away from the Giannetti family ranch and assumedly taken into custody. However, what happens to the Volkswagen Bug is still unknown to this day. In the preceding 2 weeks of the investigation, countless law enforcement officials searched the nearby New Mexico desert for any sign of Jim, including the New Mexico State Police, the Santa Rosa Police, and multiple volunteer chains. The Sullivan family quickly make their way to Santa Rosa to aid in the search as well. News stations and publications all around write stories and release missing person notices to help spread awareness. However, no leads come to fruition. Around the same time that the Jim Sullivan disappearance is investigated by local and state police, the sheriff of Santa Rosa retires, while the Giannetti family moves to Hawaii. Neither the sheriff nor the Giannettis would ever be interviewed or questioned after those events. At the end of March, investigators discover a badly decomposing body 8 miles west of Las Cruces, a New Mexico town almost 250 miles away from Santa Rosa. The body in question does have a striking resemblance to Jim despite the erosion and is initially thought to be his corpse. Unfortunately, a few weeks later, a local newspaper headlines reports that the body was indeed not Jim Sullivan and that no other leads were available at the time. 40 years later, not a shred of evidence or trace leading to Jim is found by either professional investigators or amateur sleuths. In 2010, a music producer named Matt Sullivan, with no relation to Jim from Light in the Attic Records, heard about Jim's puzzling legend and set out to find answers. While he was able to talk to some people who vaguely knew Jim from his days in Los Angeles, he was unable to crack the case of his disappearance. Although Matt was able to remaster Jim's 2 rock and roll albums, resetting UFO as a cult classic, and prized piece of art amongst fans who were equally as mystified by Jim Sullivan's disappearance as we are today. In the spellbinding case of Jim's disappearance, not many useful clues were unearthed. There were no security cameras at La Mesa Motel or official records of Jim interacting with anybody specific, either in town or at the ranch. There was no blood, no goodbye letter, and no footprints. However, investigators did find something of suspicion a few weeks into their manhunt. A major discovery that was thought to be the resolution: a decomposing body of a middle-aged man found abandoned in New Mexico desert. The body in question had multiple similarities at Jim. The corpse was of a man appearing to be in his 30s or 40s, standing at about 6 feet 2 inches. Both the body and Jim weighed about 180 pounds and sported a tattoo on their right forearms. They each had a mustache and a rough, short beard. When this revelation was first announced through the New Mexico media, journalists and citizens alike were convinced it was the body of Jim Sullivan. Unfortunately, their certainty was short-lived when the same news outlets reported the body was that of someone else, meaning Jim was most likely still lost out in the world. There are a few curious details about this case point that don't add up. First and foremost, no official police announcement regarding the body or its identity was ever released to the public. Thus, neither the people at the time nor people now know exactly whose body was discovered that spring. The fact that both Jim and the corpse were of similar builds didn't raise any red flags, but taking into consideration the similar facial hair and tattoo were of the same length and location is borderline inconceivable. It raises many questions, biggest of which is if Jim's family ever identified the body. All the news reports stated was the body was later proved not to be that of Sullivan, but there's no official medical announcement or law enforcement comment on the matter. Sadly, DNA forensics weren't in the picture back in 1975 and wouldn't have been available to correctly ID the John Doe. Another difficult detail to comprehend is the land where police found the unidentified corpse. The body was in the desert outside of Las Cruces, New Mexico, the second largest city of the state found in the Missoula Valley. Mysteriously, Las Cruces is seated near the southern border of New Mexico, almost 250 miles away from Santa Rosa. So even if there was an identification error and the body was truly that of Jim, it would mean he had somehow traveled 250 miles by foot across barren desert in a different direction than where he was last seen and died quickly enough that his body would be decomposed past easy recognition. Neither scenario adds up, making the corpse case point a catch-22 and offering quite a few foundations to endless theories regarding Jim's disappearance. Clouds of mystery have surrounded Jim Sullivan since that clear, sunny evening on March 5th. Without eyewitness testimony or hard evidence, the number of potential endings to Jim's story is vast, if there's truly an ending at all. However, there are a few with interesting ties to his friends, family, and short-lived history in Santa Rosa, involving links to police corruption, the Chicago Mafia, supernatural abduction, and even a staged farewell. First and foremost, we must consider the role of local law enforcement during Jim's time in Santa Rosa. It's possible that when Jim arrived in the small New Mexico town, he managed to upset authorities by either something he said or by seeing something he shouldn't have witnessed. It's been confirmed that Jim had at least one point of contact with a police officer outside of city limits when he was swerving across the road and was taken into the station for alcohol testing. The only piece of information known regarding what happened inside of the police department, however, is that Jim passed the alcohol test and was released. Whether or not Jim was forced inside or harassed during his stay is unknown, but certainly possible. Jim was a larger man, and while he was always regarded as a calm and collected individual, authorities could have seen him as a stranger to the area and treated him as a threat. Or maybe Jim was upset with the entire ordeal and caused a scene either at the traffic stop or during his test. Regardless, without knowing what truly happened with the officers, it's impossible to rule out a situation escalating into chaos. So, if Jim had made himself an enemy with local authorities, it's likely the police were called when Jim traveled to the Giannetti family ranch with a handle of vodka. Jim could have been drunk and in a bad mood from the previous encounter, and trespassing on a private property as an unknown figure could have caused Mrs. Giannetti to phone the police. When police arrived and saw it was Jim once again, they could have taken action into their own hands. It's possible they let Jim go off on his own into the desert and waited until he was gone to pick him back up. On the other hand, it's also possible the police never interacted with him a second time, instead finding him dead in the desert after the fact and, instead of investigating the cause of death, moved his corpse out of Santa Rosa and ignoring the situation. This would give explanation to why the John Doe corpse looks so similar to Jim's appearance, yet was discovered 250 miles away from his last sighting. These police tamperings would also explain another peculiar and disturbing anomaly recently found in the case. NamUs, or the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, is a database of all the people who have vanished or died without an identity. It covers the entire United States and is a brilliant tool in keeping track of DNA, police records, and real-time updates. However, missing from the NamUs database is Jim Sullivan. While it's not exactly a major surprise, seeing as though this case is 40 years cold, it did motivate John Lardon to look into the error. But what Lardon found is the most interesting fact of all. There is no official missing persons case filed in New Mexico, either by state police or by Santa Rosa law enforcement. There are no mentions of the case in police archives and no departmental documentation about a search for Jim Sullivan either in 1975 or otherwise. Now, while this can simply be explained by the possibility that Barbara or any other member of the Sullivan family never filed an actual missing persons report, the fact of the matter is, besides newspaper articles, there is no written communication providing a search even existed. 45 years ago, in small community or not, zero police profiles is more suspicious than coincidental, hinting that local authorities may have had a piece of the pie in whatever crime or cover-up was committed, not to mention the fact that the local Santa Rosa retired and moved away right after the investigation began. Another theory centers on the vague relevance of the Giannetti family and their rumored connections to Chicago crime and mafia ties. A few citizens near the Santa Rosa area claimed the Giannetti family had a history with illicit activities and were operating under direction from powerful people in a Chicago gang organization. Now, whether or not this was the actual dealings of an Italian mafia, or just folklore turned into hyperbole, is unknown. But with multiple claims that the Giannetti family were known for bad behavior, it's not out of the realm of possibility that they dealt with Jim's arrival using illegal means. If Jim truly did trespass on the Giannetti family ranch and disrespected Mrs. Giannetti, it makes sense that another member of the family or one of their colleagues came around and took care of Jim, who could have been drunk and insubordinate. If they indeed killed Jim and had experience with that sort of thing, they knew how to dispose of a body and leave no trace, or they planted the body down in Las Cruces and paid off the proper authorities to sway public knowledge. Now, why an organized crime family would drop a body off in the same state and general area of the murder is nonsensical. So if the Giannetti family truly is responsible, they are probably the only ones with knowledge regarding Jim's exact location and what happened in the first place. It's worth noting that none of these claims can be confirmed nor denied, with observable proof that Jim even made contact with the family. However, it should also be stated that the Giannettis packed up, left New Mexico, and moved to Hawaii at the same time the Santa Rosa sheriff retired, just as the hunt for Jim and relevant clues heated up. The last three stemming from homicidal origins is that Jim was actually running away from troubles stirred up in Los Angeles and got caught before he could escape. Jim became a socialite in LA, meeting many celebrities and fellow musicians as he performed at various clubs. One of his favorite places was The Raft, now called The Real Inn, where he played with the cream of the crop. He might have somewhere down the line fixed in with the wrong group of people at The Raft or a similar joint, got desperate for money, and was unable to pay off his debts when his scheme reached a dead end. Thus, he packed up everything, asked his family to stay put, and made a run for it, only to be caught up in the end. It would explain why he was so set on driving 15 hours, and then, on the first day of his journey, pushed himself past his mental limit. Maybe after spending time at the police station, he knew his followers were hot on the trail. So he attempted to find solace at a local residence and ended up at the Genetti Ranch. When he was denied help, he knew it was the last straw, and his pursuers picked him up after a short chase. It would also explain why Jim booked a room at the motel but never settled in, signaling he was either trying to stage his farewell or throw his pursuers off their tracks, unfortunately running into them anyway. The biggest evidence against this theory is that it's been told through the years by many known associates of Jim and his family that Jim avoided conflict at all costs and was quite soft-spoken. However, it still does take into consideration his turn towards alcohol and the pitfalls of broken dreams. We have reached out to the current owner of the Real Inn to see if they had any connections to employees still around from the days of the Raft Pub and Jim's playing circuit. The owner, Andy Leonard, informed us of a former bartender, Ralph O'Hara, whose knowledge of the restaurant dated back to the 1950s. Sadly, upon further investigation, Ralph O'Hara passed away in 2015, leaving the pool of witnesses to Jim's LA life in short supply. One popular hypothesis revolving around Jim has led to his music reaching a cult classic status, specifically his debut album titled UFO, with people believing Jim wandered into the New Mexico desert and encountered intelligent extraterrestrial life, and whether it was by his own free will or under abduction, left our planet with supernatural beings. These conspiracies draw inspection to Jim's music and the aforementioned UFO album, in which he uses surreal lyrics and experimental sound design to build his artistic style. The combination of strange soundscape and mystical songwriting lead many to believe Jim had a deeper understanding of otherworldly themes and ideas. These highlights convince some circles that Jim left on his own accord, rather living with others out in the universe than with the turmoil of failure on Earth. And while the alien abduction conspiracy theory is as often used yet skeptically charged urban legend, Jim's own family doesn't rule out the possibility themselves, saying it would have been a fitting goodbye for Jim and his mystical philosophies. In reality, Jim's UFO album was more creative circumstance than actual extraterrestrial communication. The song, titled after the album, is actually just an existential metaphor describing a religious figure of alien and appears more like a coincidence than proof of interactions with intergalactic life forms. After analyzing all of the puzzle pieces to Jim Sullivan's disappearance and his life surrounding the events, it truly is almost impossible to decide on a solid conclusion to an endlessly confusing event. No theory can be ruled out with such little and conflicting testimonies from everyone involved, but one rarely discussed sequence sticks out a little more than the rest. We believe Jim fully intended to rekindle his music passion in Nashville when he left Los Angeles. But during his grueling 15-hour drive into New Mexico that ended with fatigue and external conflict, he turned back to the bottle and, in a stupor, walked out into the desert with the intention never to return again. It's important to remember what Jim's personal life was like in 1975. His marriage was on the brink, and two massive creative endeavors ended up as major flops, providing zero rewards to the struggle and artist experiences whilst chasing their dreams in the City of Angels. Combine the overall turmoil of American culture and the state of the world at the moment in time, anxieties and anguish most likely took over Jim's emotions as he battled with the shrouds of darkness circling his family and career. Thus, Jim packed up all his belongings and set himself on a trail of redemption. When he couldn't weather the long-haul journey anymore, he was stopped by police and most likely stereotyped as an outsider, a tall, bulky man with a scraggly beard and leather jacket. After dealing with the mild aggravation of law enforcement, Jim purchased alcohol, the only comfort he knew anymore. Feeling as if the journey was insurmountable, he most likely pondered what he would do next in his motel room, eventually deciding to leave without notice. So he locked his key in his room, drove out to a place where his car would be found, and the trace would end, explaining the approximation to the Genetti Ranch. Drunk and disorientated, Jim probably stumbled out into the desert, letting go of life behind him and submitting himself to the unknown and undeniable shadow of deserted wilderness. What happened to Jim's body most likely remain a mystery. But taking into consideration the landscape, whatever he left behind was scavenged by wild animals or buried by a third party after he was found dusty in his demise. The area around Santa Rosa is also known for its unusual number of lakes and bodies of water, potential grounds for where Jim could have wandered off to and drowned him while drunk. Had he gotten far enough on foot, Jim could have also disappeared into the surrounding mountains, either dying in the hills or living off the land for a short while. It's unclear if the search efforts throughout the years included the myriad bodies of water or mountainous regions, and if they didn't, Jim's body could easily have decomposed. Many of those close to Jim claimed that he wouldn't have left on his own accord and not taken his guitar with him. However, if Jim was under the influence, his attachment to the instrument might never have crossed his mind. One of the most fascinating aspects to this conclusion is a statement made by Jim's former producer, Bob Ginter. Ginter said that one day, back during their rock and roll endeavors, in the early morning hours after a long night, the two men talked about what they would do if they had to disappear. Jim responded that he'd walk into the desert and never come back. It's easy to brush the statement off as coincidental, but even if it was just a subconscious desire, Jim had the thought to walk into the desert before he disappeared. And when factoring in Jim's addiction to the substance that brought forth subconscious feelings, it makes sense that he reconnected to the past ideation after drinking, turning to the New Mexico wilderness when all was lost. One of his more famous songs from the UFO album titled Jerome included the following lyrics: "A more natural pose I couldn't bear to see, and I hope that these people never visit me. It's my time to go. I just want the wind to blow my ashes until they're completely out of sight." Nevertheless, the story of Jim and the vanishing on March 5, 1975, has intrigued all who have discovered the enigma, either through his music or by chance. Some folks believe Jim could even still be alive. A woman by the name of Tracy Pierce worked at a foster home in the Eugene-Springfield, Oregon area about 30 years ago, helping tend to patients who needed a place to stay and care for serious brain injuries. She states that one of her patients back in the day bore a striking resemblance to Jim. Tracy also said he got beat up and left for dead in the desert. He crawled back to the road and someone brought him to the hospital. He was paralyzed from the waist down, but would still get himself up every morning and get dressed. I thought he said it was Nevada, but it was almost 30 years ago. He was a nice guy, but kept to himself. We have reached out to Tracy for further comments, but have yet to hear back. Nevertheless, let's not overlook Jim's unmatched musical style and utterly singular knack for lyric writing while we continue to look for clues in his absence. Many people think Jim could have become a huge star and enjoyed great success as a folk artist if he had been in the appropriate situation and had a stronger network of supporters. Light in the Attic Records and producer Matt Sullivan, who is unrelated to Jim but has written a few articles on him and his legacy that are widely available online, remastered his 2 albums. As you listen, visualize Jim as his dazzling soul, a representation of audacious ambitions and unique abilities. Recall his amiable manner and upbeat disposition as he assisted listeners nationwide in escaping into magical and melodic realms. The riddles surrounding Jim Sullivan, the Highwayman, should eventually be answered. But for now, creativity and imagination will always be present. Moving on to the next case. Patricia Joyce Morris. On January 10, 1966, Patricia Joyce Morris was born to George Morris, a retired Army chief, and Marjorie Morris. She had 2 brothers and a sister, making 3 siblings in all. Although born in Birmingham, Patsy, as she was affectionately called, relocated to Isleworth, southwest London, at the age of 13. Patsy vanished on June 16, 1980, while the students were having their lunch break. The 14-year-old may have chosen to walk home that day since she needed to change into dry clothes because she hadn't had a raincoat on that morning. On her way there, Patsy vanished. 2 days later, a police dog found her body on Hounslow Heath. She had been left face down in a thicket just a quarter mile from her home. A ligature had been used to take her life. Levi Belfield was 12 years old at the time. After leaving Crane Junior School, he moved to Feltham Comprehensive, the same school that Patsy attended. In fact, Belfield had been her childhood boyfriend. A year after what happened to Patsy, Belfield was convicted of the first official crime of burglary. He wasn't at school on the day Patsy was last seen, and he knew the area where she was found very well. When Patsy's mother learned of where her daughter was discovered, it caused great confusion. She didn't understand why Patsy would have walked through there. "We can't understand what she was doing on the heath. She was always told not to go there and never disobeyed our orders," she told the press. Knowing now that Belfield used to hang out there, often skipping school to do so, it does make you wonder. But was Belfield born evil? Could a boy that age really be capable of committing something like that? Following the conclusion of Millie's case, the possibility was explored. When Patsy's father, George Morris, heard about Belfield's connection to his daughter, he recalled a time all those years ago when a teenage boy had called his house and given him a death threat. He believes that was Belfield. He's a local man, which is why it could be him. "And it's terrifying to think that someone of 12 or 13 could have done it," George said. Patsy Morris wasn't the only unsolved slaying that Belfield was considered for. In 1990, 51-year-old housewife Judith Gold was found a stone's throw from her Hampstead home, having been viciously struck in the head with an unknown item. Similar incidents took place across London from 1990 to 2004. All of these cases could be linked to Belfield due to the nature of them. The weapons of choice were distinct, the same type of weapons he used on Marcia and Amelie. While they couldn't confirm without a shadow of a doubt that he was the person responsible, he could also not be ruled out in any of the many incidents except for one. On July 6, 1996, 45-year-old Lynn Russell and her young daughter, Megan. The pair and Lynn's other daughter, 9-year-old Josie, were ambushed while walking home from a swimming gala. They were then tied up and struck repeatedly with a hammer. Lynn, Megan, and the family dog lost their lives that day. Miraculously, Josie survived. While she was able to make a full recovery, it is highly likely that she still lives with the mental scars of what happened that tragic day. Belfield allegedly confessed to the crime to his cellmate. Belfield denies ever making this confession. His ex-girlfriend, who helped get a conviction in Millie's trial, has always maintained that Belfield was with her that day. "My daughter was born in '96, and that was the day of my birthday. He, Belfield, never left my side all day and all night, so there's absolutely no way he could have gone from Twickenham, where I lived, or Windsor, where I kept my horses, to Kent. Do what they say he did and get back without me knowing he was there. I can hand to my heart, I hate to say it, but I can say hand to my heart, he didn't do it," she said. Michael Stone was convicted of the charges after a second trial following a successful appeal from his first conviction. Michael Stone had been behind bars since 2001. He still maintains his innocence. There have been many other cases that Belfield was considered for, and some that he allegedly confessed to. But as of today, police have not been able to find any substantial evidence that ties Belfield to any of these cases. Maybe one day the police will track down who was responsible for taking these lives, and maybe that man may just be Levi Belfield. Levi Belfield remains behind bars at HMP Franklin in County Durham. He will never set foot in the outside world again. On June 29, 2017, Gemma released a book titled My Sister Millie. In the poignant essay, Gemma shares her experiences navigating that turbulent period while coping with her sister's passing, the media circus, and her parents' misgivings. Gemma describes her journey towards recovery. The narrative of Millie and Gemma's two stolen childhoods, as well as the love that held the family together through their struggles with horrific darkness and injustice, are told in an excerpt from the blurb. Moving on to the next case. Richard Thomas Alt. A human skull was found by a fisherman at the Morrisville boat ramp in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, on June 15, 1986. The skull was brought to the Buckingham Township Police by the fisherman. The only relic found was the skull. Although it was established that the victim was most likely Caucasian, officials were unsure of the victim's age or gender other than the fact that she was an adult under the age of 70. The investigation was abandoned after investigators tried for years to identify the unidentified individual but were unsuccessful. Then, in September of 2022, the skull was sent to a forensic genealogy company called Othram for DNA testing. Othram first determined the skull belonged to a man. Then they linked him, thanks to his now-grown daughter, contributing DNA to a public genealogy database, which resulted in a potential match. The Bucks County detectives spoke to the DNA contributor, a 49-year-old Florida woman, on January 4, 2023. The woman told detectives that she was 11 years old when her father, Richard Thomas Alt, went missing in Trenton, Pennsylvania. She said that her father's girlfriend's life was taken in 1985 and her father had not been seen since. The woman shared her DNA results from the genealogy website, and Othram confirmed the father-daughter link. Thus, it was confirmed that the skull belonged to Thomas Alt. Bucks County District Attorney Matt Weintraub had this to say about the identification. "I can't even imagine wondering and worrying about a lost family member for even a day, let alone for 37 years. That wait is now over for Mr. Alt's family. I'm just glad that we could give them some peace of mind with this identification and the eventual return of his remains to his family. This would not have been possible but for the technical expertise that Othram provided us for free. I hope that this powerful combination of technology and genealogy becomes the template for solving cold and current cases now and in the future." Richard Thomas Alt was 31 when he was reported missing to New Jersey's Trenton Police Department in early 1985. His parents last saw him on Christmas Eve of 1984. In April of 1985, the body of his girlfriend Lori Sidham was discovered in the Delaware River. At this time, investigators are trying to figure out who killed Richard and Lori. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with us. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps us bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.